James Carter sipped his morning coffee on the porch, as usual, until he noticed the oddest thing. Silence. No splash, no shimmer, just stillness. The Arizona sun had barely cleared the horizon, but the day was already warm, the kind that made you squint just stepping outside. James always enjoyed these early hours, before the lawnmowers fired up, before HOA board members started roaming like meter maids. It was his quiet time, a small pleasure in a community that had grown more rigid with each passing year. Yesterday, he had heard the local radio chime in from the kitchen. The Canyon Hills HOA was reminding everyone about the summer garden contest. 4th of July weekend was approaching, and HOA President Linda Mayfield had apparently emailed 3 full pages of compliance reminders about mulch color, hedge height, and proper flagpole positioning. James had rolled his eyes and turned the volume down. Now the silence he was hearing didn't feel peaceful. It felt off. He turned his head toward the backyard. No sound of water gently lapping against tile. No glint of sun bouncing off the surface. A creeping unease settled in his stomach. He stood, coffee forgotten on the armrest, and walked down the side path toward the pool. The sight stopped him cold. The pool was empty. Not a crack or a leak. Not some overnight pump malfunction. Just a dry, light blue shell baking under the early sun. A faint chlorine scent lingered in the air like an insult. His perfectly maintained, crystal-clear pool was now a sterile hole in the ground. For a brief moment, he considered whether this was a prank, but he quickly dismissed it. No one in Canyon Hills had the imagination, and there was only one group in the neighborhood bold enough to do something this absurd. The HOA. He turned back toward the street, scanning the row of pristine houses. Just across the cul-de-sac, a small knot of people was gathered on the sidewalk. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched high on her nose, stood Linda Mayfield, flanked by Tom Belson and a younger assistant James didn't recognize. He crossed the lawn with slow, purposeful steps. Linda noticed him and smiled, a precise, tight-lipped expression she had perfected over years of micromanagement. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she chirped. He didn't answer. His eyes locked on hers as he gestured toward his backyard. "My pool," he said calmly. "It's empty." Linda tilted her head, sympathetic but smug. "Yes, unfortunate, isn't it?" she replied, flipping a page on her clipboard. "Water violation 312-B. We had to take immediate corrective action." "You had to drain it?" Tom shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Linda, on the other hand, straightened with pride. "We sent a notice 2 weeks ago," she said. "Your usage exceeded the HOA seasonal limits. We're in a drought." James narrowed his eyes. "The city hasn't declared a drought." She shrugged. "The HOA has." He took a slow breath. "So, you entered my property without my permission." "We acted under HOA emergency provisions," Linda said crisply. Clause 7.9, Homeowner Noncompliance with Environmental Guidelines. She handed him a bright pink form. James glanced at the fine print. Unauthorized water use. $3,000 penalty. Payment due within 10 business days. He folded the paper once, carefully, and slid it into his back pocket. "The golf course is still running its sprinklers," he said. "Twice a day." "The board reviewed that," Linda said smoothly. "That's considered community use green space, different classification." "And the fountain at the clubhouse?" he pressed. "Decorative," she replied. "Psychological benefit during high heat periods. Studies support it." James let silence stretch between them. A bird landed on a nearby mailbox and chirped, as if to cut the tension. Tom cleared his throat and took a half-step back. "You just drained the wrong man's pool," James said, voice steady. Linda's smile didn't falter, but her brow twitched, just slightly. James turned without another word and walked back toward his house. Mrs. Delaney was peeking through her lace curtains. Their eyes met. She gave a slow, barely perceptible nod. Inside, the air felt too cool, too still. James walked past the kitchen, down the hallway, to a room he rarely entered these days. It smelled faintly of old paper and lemon polish. Bookshelves lined the walls, and a locked cabinet stood in the corner. He opened the bottom drawer of the cabinet. Reaching past a stack of blueprints and a faded Canyon Hills property map, he pulled out a thick, leather-bound binder. The gold lettering on the front had dulled over time, but was still legible. Canyon Hills. Private Water Rights. 2004. Linda had drained a pool. James was about to drain her authority, drop by drop. The morning sun had climbed high, casting harsh light into James Carter's study. A ceiling fan creaked rhythmically overhead, stirring the desert air without much relief. James stood at his desk, the binder from the drawer now open in front of him. He turned each page with slow, deliberate care, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. The contract hadn't aged much. The signatures, stamps, and legalese remained perfectly legible, a testament to the foresight he'd had 20 years ago. Most people forgot about the early days of Canyon Hills, when the only things standing on this land were a few mesquites and an old gravel road. But James remembered every zoning meeting, every dusty handshake, and every corner cut by the developers trying to turn red dirt into suburban profit. Back then, he had still been working for the City of Phoenix's Water Infrastructure Division. His name carried weight, especially with the contractors who needed approval stamps. One of them, a developer with more vision than cash flow, had leaned over a folding table during a pre-construction meeting and asked him a question off the record. "You interested in water rights out here?" the man had whispered. "Not a lot of bidders yet. I could give you first crack." James had raised an eyebrow. "You're not holding them for the city?" The developer had chuckled. "The city doesn't want the headache. They'll build the pipes and forget about it. You take the rights. You control access. Sell back if you want. Or don't." It had taken him 3 days to draw up a purchase agreement. 2 weeks later, the entire Canyon Hills development had gone up without a second thought toward who actually owned the water that would flow beneath its concrete. Now, all these years later, James traced a finger along his own signature at the bottom of that faded contract. The name of his holding company, Silver Mesa Utility Services, was right there in black ink, legally binding, quietly powerful. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. It rang twice. "Silver Mesa, this is Carla," came the voice on the other end. "Hi, Carla. It's James Carter." There was a brief pause. "Well, I'll be. Mr. Carter, I haven't heard from you in ages." "I need access to my client file for Canyon Hills," he said. "Water rights folder. Anything flagged?" A few seconds of keyboard clacking filled the line. "No flags, sir. It's all still under your name. No transfer attempts. HOA made no inquiries either. You want a copy sent over?" "Already have the original," he said. "I just needed to be sure." He thanked her and hung up. Later that day, he drove into the city. The cool of the municipal building lobby was a relief. A young clerk behind the counter greeted him with a chipper tone that suggested no idea who he was. "I need to confirm water registration status for Canyon Hills HOA," he said. The clerk nodded and tapped on her keyboard. "Okay, let's see. Not seeing any active water service permit for HOA authority. Says here the original access came through a private utility. Silver Mesa. That's odd." James leaned forward slightly. "Odd how?" "Well, HOA developments usually get rights transferred automatically from the builder or city," she said. "But this one never got reassigned. Technically, there's no documentation showing HOA owns the water rights or even applied for them." She turned the monitor so he could see for himself. The digital form was empty under entity ownership, and next to Water Distribution Authority, it listed Silver Mesa Utility Services. Registered, James Carter. James nodded. That's what I needed to confirm. As he turned to leave, the clerk hesitated. Oh, one more thing. There's a meeting record from 2005. Looks like the HOA board voted not to pursue water rights transfer. Said it might complicate future governance. Weird choice. James didn't answer. He didn't need to. Back home, the sun had begun to fall, casting long shadows over canyon hills. He poured himself a glass of iced tea, sat down in his study, and stared at the phone. Everything was still in place. The contract, the city records, Silver Mesa. The HOA had been operating under the assumption that the city controlled their water. But assumptions didn't hold legal weight. He thought briefly of Linda Mayfield, of her smug smile, the fine she handed him, and the way she dismissed his questions like he was just another rule breaker. He reached for the phone again and dialed a number only a few people even knew still worked. When a soft voice answered, he said simply, "Begin the shutoff," then hung up. It began with a weak sputter from a hose. By noon, Canyon Hills was bone dry. The first sign of trouble came just after 10, when Gil Ramsey stood in his front yard with a coiled garden hose in one hand and a puzzled look on his face. The stream had slowed to a spit, then vanished altogether, leaving only a hiss of air. He tapped the nozzle twice and looked at it like it had betrayed him. Down the block, sprinklers began choking into silence. A mother watering petunias swore under her breath as the spray faded mid-sweep. An elderly man with a patchy lawn stood with hands on hips, watching brown grass curl in the rising heat. By mid-morning, the temperature had reached 105 degrees. Shade was precious, and tempers were already running short. Inside the Moonlight Diner, ceiling fans turned lazily overhead as neighbors gathered with iced tea and sweat-dampened flyers from the HOA's last meeting. The booths buzzed with the same question repeated in different tones. Curious, annoyed, anxious? What happened to the water? Mrs. Delaney, seated near the window with her usual cup of black coffee and slice of raisin toast, listened quietly. She was wearing her pale blue sun hat, the one she saved for serious mornings. Across from her, Ron Vega nursed a lemonade and folded his arms. "It's not the city," he said. "Already called. They say everything's fine on their end." Gil stepped in moments later, still holding the useless hose nozzle. "Someone better fix this before my tomatoes die." Back at the HOA office, Linda Mayfield was already pacing. Her assistant was on the phone with the city utility desk, while Tom Belson pretended to be busy with a stack of unrelated paperwork. Rita Chu, the vice president, stood by the window, watching the street. "They're saying it's a localized failure," Linda muttered. "Must be something with the lines. A main burst, maybe." Rita turned to her. "Then why didn't we get an alert?" Linda's lips thinned. "They're probably working on it. People always overreact." Rita didn't respond, but her frown lingered. She watched a group of residents forming outside, not with pitchforks, but with arms crossed and brows furrowed. Not angry, yet, but certainly no longer indifferent. A boy ran up the sidewalk carrying a bottle of store-bought water and called out to his mother, "It's all out at the market, too." By lunchtime, the sidewalks shimmered with heat, and lawns that had once been HOA-mandated emerald began to dull under the scorching sun. Decorative fountains were dry. The prized community rose bed wilted at the roots. The fountain at the clubhouse let out a wheezing burp before stopping entirely. James Carter had said nothing to anyone that morning. He took his usual walk, nodded at neighbors, even stopped at the corner to pet a golden retriever named Marbles. But his silence spoke louder than Linda's reassurances. People noticed. By 2 o'clock, the gathering near the clubhouse had doubled, Folding chairs had been brought out. Water bottles were passed around sparingly. Gil told a story about digging trenches in Vietnam to catch rainwater, drawing half-skeptical, half-nervous laughs. Mrs. Delaney leaned over to Ron. "He's got something up his sleeve. I know it. The way he looked at her yesterday, it wasn't fear. It was strategy." Ron nodded slowly. "Man like that doesn't talk unless he's got teeth behind it." Then James arrived. He didn't stride. He didn't command. He simply walked to the edge of the crowd and waited. Someone spotted him and called his name. A hush spread like a ripple through the group. Linda emerged from the clubhouse, red in the face, paper in hand. "We are coordinating with the city. Please remain calm while we determine the source of the issue." James raised one hand, not high, not loud, just enough. "Don't bother," he said. All eyes turned. "I own the rights to every drop of water that flows here, and now none of it will." There was no shouting, no applause, just stunned quiet. Then a low murmur as the meaning sank in. Neighbors looked at one another, back at James, and then toward the clubhouse behind Linda, as if seeing it for the first time. Linda opened her mouth but found no words. Someone dropped a flyer. It landed on the pavement with a soft whisper. Ron broke the silence with a smirk and a slow shake of his head. "Looks like the HOA just got outwatered." By the second day without water, Canyon Hills wasn't just thirsty, it was furious. The sun had scorched the sidewalks into pale blisters, and the shadows of the neighborhood's palm trees had retreated like beaten dogs. Trash bins sat full and stinking, lawns faded to brittle straw, and even the HOA-mandated petunia beds outside the clubhouse drooped in defiance. What began as whispers of confusion had become a low-grade roar of frustration. Inside the community center, Linda Mayfield adjusted the neckline of her blouse, took a breath, and pushed open the door to the mostly empty meeting hall. Of the 30 chairs set out, maybe 7 were filled. Rita Chu stood at the side, tablet in hand, her lips tight. Tom Belson, as usual, looked half asleep in the back. Linda forced a smile. "Thank you all for coming. I know it's warm, but we're here to provide answers." An older man raised a hand. "You gonna provide water too?" A weak laugh fluttered through the room, quickly dying as Linda's smile hardened. She cleared her throat and launched into her notes. "The situation remains a localized infrastructure issue. We're coordinating with the city and utility providers to identify the cause. In the meantime, we urge residents to be patient and limit unnecessary water use." "Hard to limit something we don't have," someone muttered. Linda continued, as if she hadn't heard. "We've reached out to the city manager's office and are waiting on a formal statement. We're also investigating the possibility of a temporary water tank." Rita finally spoke, quietly but firmly. "The city already confirmed it's not on their end. Twice." Linda turned to her, startled. "That's not the information I was given." Rita didn't blink. "Then you might want to check who you've been talking to." Back at Moonlight Diner, the real meeting was already underway. The booths were full, the counters crowded. Large jugs of sweet tea sweated on every table. Patio fans spun overhead, and napkins were fanned against flushed faces. The usual buzz of conversation had turned into a measured hum of tension. Ron Vega stood near the window, arms folded, watching kids drag buckets from garage stashes. "My grandkids are coming this weekend," he said. "What am I supposed to do, hand them a sponge bath from the cooler?" A few chuckles followed, but they lacked warmth. Mrs. Delaney sat with her hands wrapped tightly around a glass of iced tea, her wedding band glinting under the fluorescence. "You know," she said softly, "after Frank passed, I missed a landscaping compliance fine by 3 days. They threatened foreclosure over a late fee. I had to borrow money from my sister in Nebraska just to keep my house." Her voice didn't rise, but her words carried. People turned to look. No one interrupted. Ron shook his head. "I'd rather pay James Carter for water than keep funding the HOA to bully us. At least he tells the truth." There was a murmur of agreement. James stepped into the diner just as the room hit peak silence. He didn't wave, didn't call attention. He walked to an empty table, placed a worn leather folder on its surface, and opened it. Several neighbors drifted closer. Inside was a stack of papers, official, signed, stamped. A few curious onlookers leaned in, eyes widening. Rita arrived a few minutes later, still in her HOA polo, though she looked as if she'd rather be wearing anything else. She saw the folder and went pale. James looked up at her, then said nothing. He didn't need to. Ron pulled a sheet from the stack and read the heading aloud. Canyon Hills Utility Agreement, Private Water Rights Transfer. Dated 2004. There were gasps, quiet but unmistakable. Some of the older residents exchanged glances, vague memories of early development days surfacing. Linda hadn't mentioned this. Gil Ramsey, perched on a stool, scratched his chin. "All this time we thought the HOA had the wheel. Turns out they never even had the keys." Mrs. Delaney closed her eyes for a moment, as if soaking in the relief. Then came a voice from the back, uncertain at first, but gaining strength. "Let's vote them out." The words hung in the air. Then came another whisper. And another. "Vote them out." The chant didn't spread like fire. It crept, slow and resolute. And in its quiet rhythm, something shifted. Power, confidence, purpose. Not loud, not angry, just decided. The ballots were printed on ordinary paper, but their weight could topple a kingdom. Saturday morning in Canyon Hills felt strangely peaceful. The heat hadn't yet pressed down like it would by noon, and the sky was soft with high clouds drifting lazily overhead. A large white canopy had been set up on the clubhouse lawn. Beneath it, rows of folding chairs stood neatly aligned. A plastic cooler full of ice and lemon water sat on a long table next to a clear bin marked ballots. There were no signs, no slogans, no podium, just a table, a stack of paper, and a community that had finally found its voice. James Carter arrived early but stood off to the side, watching in silence. He wore his usual collared shirt and khakis, nothing fancy, nothing loud. He didn't wave or call out. He simply nodded to those who noticed him, and they nodded back. The residents trickled in slowly at first, older couples in sun hats, retirees leaning on canes, teenagers assigned to help tally by parents who wanted them to see how real democracy worked. A young couple with a baby stroller parked near the shade. Gil Ramsey brought a folding chair of his own and set it up under the biggest palm tree. Linda Mayfield arrived 10 minutes late. Her hair was neatly pinned, her blouse crisp, her clipboard clutched with white-knuckled purpose. Rita Chu followed a few steps behind, her expression unreadable. Linda walked straight to the front, looked over the modest crowd, and cleared her throat. "If I could just say a few words before we begin," she said. The group fell silent out of courtesy, not anticipation. "I know this past week has been difficult," she began. "I know there have been frustrations, misunderstandings, and, frankly, miscommunications. But I want to remind everyone what the HOA was built for. Order, beauty, safety. We've had a few bumps, yes, but with a little reform, we can restore what makes this neighborhood great." She paused, waiting for applause that didn't come. "I propose a community advisory board," she continued. "More transparency, monthly listening sessions, and the retraction of the latest fines. We can adjust. We can evolve." The silence that followed wasn't cruel. It was polite, respectful, and empty. Linda's smile faded just slightly before she took her seat. Rita didn't join her. Instead, Rita walked toward the table and stood beside the ballot box. She didn't say a word, but her position was louder than any speech. Mrs. Delaney rose from her chair with the help of a neighbor. She walked slowly but with purpose to the front, unfolding a single sheet of paper from her purse. She faced the group, cleared her throat softly, and read. For 12 years, I've lived in fear of a letter in my mailbox. Not fear like in a war zone, but a quiet, creeping fear that I'd paint my shutters the wrong shade, or plant the wrong flowers, or forget to pull my trash bins in by nightfall. I've watched good people cry over fines they didn't understand. I've seen neighbors stop waving. I've seen a community shrink behind hedges and rules and silence. No more. She folded the paper again and returned to her seat. Someone clapped, then someone else. And before long, the small space under the canopy filled with a steady, quiet rhythm of applause. Voting began. There were no speeches, no chants, just residents walking one by one to the table, marking their ballot, folding it, and placing it into the bin. James didn't speak. He voted and stepped aside. Gil used a clipboard as a makeshift table across his knees. A teen helped Mrs. Delaney to the ballot box. Even Tom Belson showed up, hands in pockets, and dropped in his vote without a word. When the last ballot was in, 2 residents opened the bin and began sorting. The process was methodical. The air felt thick. No one spoke. Then one of the teens helping with the count stood and whispered something to Rita. She nodded, stepped forward, and addressed the group. The final tally, she said, voice clear, is 81% in favor of dissolving the HOA. There was a pause, half a breath, and then the lawn erupted. Not wild cheering, but a cathartic release. Applause, smiles, tears. Neighbors hugged. Someone passed out cookies they had brought just in case. James stood quietly off to the side. He didn't raise a fist or take a bow. He just exhaled, a long, slow breath, and allowed himself a faint, almost imperceptible smile. From across the lawn, Linda watched. Her face was unreadable. She looked down at her clipboard, then at the crowd. She said nothing. Without fanfare, she turned and walked toward her car. Clipboard still in hand, shoulders drawn tight. She opened the door, sat down, and drove away without a word. 3 days later, the sprinklers sang again, and this time they danced to a different tune. The hum of water weaving through lawns returned like a long-forgotten song. Grass blades glistened under the Sunday morning sun, and for the first time in weeks, Canyon Hills looked lived in, not just managed. Birds dipped through the spray, chasing gnats. Children chalked colorful fish and stars on dry pavement. Somewhere in the distance, someone grilled sausages. James Carter stood by his mailbox, holding a tin of lemon pie sent over by Mrs. Delaney. His yard was no longer under inspection. It was his again. Neighbors waved as they passed, coffee mugs in hand. Some stopped to chat. A few brought folding chairs and lingered under the wide shade tree near his driveway. No one asked permission. No one needed to. At the center of the cul-de-sac, a homemade bulletin board now stood where the old HOA signpost had been. In hand-painted lettering, it read, "Ask first. Help often." Pushpins held notes about a bake sale, a tool swap, and a notice for the first meeting of the new garden club. Gardeners without fines. Someone had even stuck a little cartoon of Linda next to a wilted ficus. No one admitted who drew it, but everyone laughed when they saw it. James spent the early part of the morning reviewing paperwork. Over the past few days, he'd drawn up water access contracts, clear, simple, and fair. Each homeowner would pay a modest flat fee directly to Silver Mesa Utility Services. No fines, no inspections, no arbitrary caps, just accountability, honesty, and clean water. Ron Vega had helped spread the word. Gil Ramsey, for all his grumbling, had volunteered to repaint the faded mailbox numbers along the street. Even teenagers who once rolled their eyes at HOA rules now showed up to replant flowers with Mrs. Delaney, who took great joy in bossing them around, with kindness this time. James watched all this unfold from his porch, sipping coffee. A white SUV slowed in front of a for sale sign 2 doors down. A young couple stepped out, holding hands, looking around with cautious hope. "Is this the neighborhood without an HOA?" the woman asked Ron, who was trimming his hedges. He nodded. "We vote with pie now. You in?" They smiled. "We just might be." Later that evening, the scent of barbecue floated across the street. Folding tables were set up, dishes passed down rows of laughing neighbors. Someone had brought a radio playing an oldies station. The lawn sparkled under string lights that zigzagged across the driveways. James walked among the crowd, thanked the folks who shook his hand, but never lingered too long. He didn't want a spotlight. He just wanted quiet and community. As the sun dipped low, a boy about 12 wandered over, holding a paper plate and a hot dog. "So, who's in charge now?" he asked. James looked around, at the laughter, the light, the gentle hum of shared ownership. "You are," he said. "We all are." The boy blinked, nodded, and ran back to his friends. The night settled soft. James stepped into his backyard and looked over the pool, refilled, serene. Lights shimmered on the surface like tiny constellations. He eased into the water with a satisfied sigh. From over the fence, someone called out, "Hey, James, you're not going to start charging us for sunshine, are you?" He laughed, the sound echoing off tile and water. "Sunshine's still free, but don't test me on rainwater." In the days that followed, Canyon Hills found its rhythm again, not by force but through quiet cooperation. What began as one man's stand against control became a town's return to common sense and shared purpose. Sometimes the strongest roots grow beneath the surface, in neighbors who show up, speak out, and stand firm when it matters most. Like water returning to dry soil, community finds a way, so long as we remember. Respect flows better than rules, and no fence is taller than the ones we build in silence.